Hello, you are watching This Week in Student Government. I'm Jorie Palmer. Today we discuss the new bike legislation and we visit with the SGA representative for Pi Kappa Delta. All this coming up next. Jordan Scribner, Student Government Representative for Pi Kappa Delta, joins us to talk about recent legislation. Hello, thank you for joining us today. Now, what exactly is Pi Kappa Delta?
Pi Kappa Delta is the honorary fraternity for the speech and debate team.
Is it the same as the Honor Society, or are they two different things?
I'm not sure, but I think it definitely is a fraternity that represents the Forensics Association.
Now, this is your first year in student government as a freshman. Can you tell me what you've learned so far this year?
As a freshman, I wanted to get involved, and so I tried SGA, and from what I've learned from SGA was that I've seen how much the students actually care for the campus and how much they want to improve the quality of Cameron, and it's just a very interesting way by passing legislation to get those things done.
What is your job as representative for Pi Kappa Delta?
As a representative for Pi Kappa Delta, I have to attend the meetings, and then I report back for monthly meetings to Pi Kappa Delta and let them know what's going on in SGA.
Can you tell us a little bit about what has been going on in SGA?
Well, lately, this past Monday, we talked about changing the name of the Aggie Gym to Aggie Arena, and after discussing that, we had a vote, and it failed. Then we talked about the new bike legislation, and basically the author proposed that one bike rack be placed in front of every building on campus, and by doing so he hopes to encourage students to ride their bikes and to encourage them not to use their cars as often instead. And then we also brought up one new legislation about changing the format of the financial records in the MyCU account.
Well, thank you. Our CUTV reporter, Amanda Finch, was at the meeting, and she gives us a closer look at that legislation.
If you've ever been worried about trying to find a place to park on campus, one representative has the answer. Freshman Randy Mahalik wants to encourage more students to ride their bikes on campus. This week in SGA, Mahalik introduced legislation calling for the addition of more bike racks at Cameron. The legislation states that being the university of choice in Southwest Oklahoma, we need to strive for a cleaner, more efficient environment. With more bike racks, people will be more inclined to ride bicycles, and it will help save the environment. Mahalik asked that a bike rack should be placed within 40 feet of the main entrance to all buildings on campus, and that this take place by the 2009 fall semester.
I think it'll help Cameron because it'll allow people to get around more easily on a bike and make Cameron look prettier, because you're not seeing bikes chained up to signs or sculptures or anything like that.
The legislation will go into second reading next week. Levi Pettyjohn also introduced new legislation to senators and representatives this week. The legislation is calling for a change of financial records in MyCU. It states that the current layouts are confusing and unprofessional, and it asks that the current format of the financial tab be replaced by a simpler format that clearly states only data relevant to the student. This piece of legislation will also go into second reading at next week's meeting. Those in favor of changing the name of the Aggie Gymnasium to the Aggie Arena will have to try again. The legislation calling for the name change failed this week by a close vote. SGA will have a booth set up this weekend at CU Saturday, where prospective students in attendance can learn more about the organization. Many senators and representatives will be at OIL this weekend at the state capitol learning more about the legislative system. Tune in next week to hear about their experiences. For This Week in SGA, I'm Amanda Finch.
Thank you. Now, what is the purpose of the bike legislation?
With the bike legislation, the purpose would be just to encourage students to ride their bikes more, and also because there are so few bike racks on campus, it would make it easier for students who do wish to ride their bikes to be able to lock up their bikes safely and not have to worry about students stealing them or anybody else off campus messing with their property.
Do you think that many people on campus actually do or would ride bikes? I mean, especially in the winter months, it doesn't seem very feasible.
Well, this legislation would encourage bike racks to be in place by the fall of 2009. And so during those months, people would ride bikes more. But also, I have seen a few students ride their bikes. Definitely not much during the winter months because it is so cold. But I think if students had the opportunity, they would ride their bikes more in the warmer months. So.
Do you think that this has been an issue because of gas prices and the economy? Is that why they're bringing it up?
I think it is definitely an influence on the legislation. I don't know if it's the only reason, but I think the prices of fuel and the toxins that the cars give off also play a role in this legislation.
On the other hand, do you think there might be more problems with, bike locks? And if a bike got stolen, would that be the school's liability?
We have yet to discuss that. In the second reading, that would definitely be a question to ask the author of the bill.
Have you authored any bills yourself?
Not yet. As a freshman, I haven't had much confidence in myself to write legislation, but next year I hope to put in place some legislation of my own.
What do you think about the Aggie gym legislation? Why do you think it failed?
I think it failed because students didn't necessarily think it was necessary to change the name. Aggie Gymnasium has been in place for such a long time, and Aggie Arena just didn't seem quite to fit the building structure that we currently have. And also, I don't think the authors had as much information about changing it as best as they could have brought to the table. So with those doubts and those questions, the majority of the students in SGA couldn't pass it.
I don't think anybody even really understood the purpose. What was the author even thinking at the time?
He believed that, or the authors believed that Aggie Gymnasium confused students into believing that Aggie Gym referred to the fitness center instead of the place where the teams play basketball and volleyball. So.
Tell me a little bit about the financial records legislation. What changes are they wanting to make on MyCU?
They're just wanting to make the financial records seem more appealing and easier to understand. In the MyCU account, it's fairly difficult to keep track of how much you owe and how much you are actually being given, whether through scholarships or grants. And hopefully with this legislation, we can see if the financial department will be able to sort that out to make it easier for students to understand.
I definitely agree that MyCU is really confusing, and I know a lot of people that have had problems with MyCU, including myself. However, do you think that SGA even really has control over financial services?
As much as we can do, we can pass this legislation, and then then that legislation gets sent to Dean Holland, and then Dean Holland can send it to President Ross. And from there, it can cause a turn of events to go to the financial department where they can either update the current system they have, or they can purchase a new system or something that would meet this legislation.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of This Week in Student Government. We would like to encourage you to view this show along with other CUTV programming on YouTube. Simply type CUInternetTV with no spaces and click search. On behalf of Dr. Matt Jenkins and the CUTV crew, I'm Jorie Palmer. Thanks for watching and have a great week. Okay, now we just pretend to talk because we don't have any credits. Thank you for coming. You did really good. You gave really long answers. Sorry.